This last year has been really an interesting one for me, and it's been really fascinating to kind of observe my own pattern moving through this time and kind of watching how I am navigating through this new territory in my own life. And it's really interesting. I've learned a lot. It's one thing to do some research and to be reading and kind of watching and monitoring other people's patterns. But when you are self observing, there's some really interesting light bulb moments that you understand in a way that maybe you couldn't if it wasn't yourself that was going through this process. And so there's something to be said for experiential learning over other kinds of learning. And so it's interesting to just think about how this last year has gone for me and how it is really so that you go through a tough time and then you start to find yourself withdrawing from activities that you maybe used to be interested in. Your relationships change, your worldview changes, your the way that you move in the world now is different. It looks and feels different to you and to other people. Maybe you find yourself kind of um, falling backward into this place that is somewhat familiar and yet very new territory at once. Not every situation can be fixed. If someone passes away or there's a health issue that's, there's no recovery from that, then it becomes kind of learning how to understand, well, what is the new normal now moving forward? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What is necessary in order to thrive, to get from just existing to thriving? And when I think about relationships, I think about my own relationships, I think about how it's really interesting to observe my own patterns of engaging and pulling back, and why I am in wanting to engage when I want to engage and pulling back when I want to pull back. You hear that old phrase, "Misery loves company." That's not true for me. I don't think that when we're in a tough spot, we want to necessarily be surrounding ourselves with other people who are in a tough spot all the time, because then it gets really hard to find your way out if you're all just kind of in that space of despair. Then how do you figure out a way to climb out? I think that there's value in connecting with people in a tough spot when you're in a tough spot, because you can have compassion exchanges. You are reminded that the world is not just about you and your situation. There are other people who are struggling through things too, and you can be inspired by how other people are moving through their journey. But I also think that it's important to have a balance. When I think about balance, when you're going through a tough time, especially when it involves grief and grief over illness or loss, it's really hard to engage with people who, when you're going through a tough time, everything is just going well for them. Work is great, health is great, life is great, and you're happy for them and you are celebrating with them. But on the other hand, it's hard to connect. You find yourself, I know with me, I find myself just kind of feeling like, okay, well, that's great. I'm so glad you're doing well. And you start to feel a sense of, I don't want to say shame, but you do start to feel a sense of disconnect again. That disconnect is highlighted, I feel like, when I'm in conversations with people where just everything is just going well for them. I'm knowing that life it ebbs and flows for all of us. And so when somebody happens to be in a space where things are going well, we should want to celebrate that with people. But what I find is really most useful to me is when I can get together with people who, when I talk about balance, there can be more of a balance of conversation. So we can come together and share what is going well, both of us, and then we can come together and share where we're challenged, and that feels more normal, and that feels more to me um, the space where I feel the most comfortable right now. And that's not always easy to find, because people are used to either staying in one space or the other. And what I long for so often is more relationships where there can be that compassion exchange, those spaces in the conversation where there's listening happening and sharing happening, and where we are sharing our challenges and our successes both.